Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Bird's Eye View podcast. Jori Negin-Shecter joined by Jake Brannen, and catastrophe has struck Toronto. Shohei Ohtani is headed to the Los Angeles Dodgers on a historic 10-year, $700 million deal with deferrals out the wazoo. This could not have broken down any worse for the Blue Jays. Jake, an initial reaction to this, this disaster.
I mean, it's just so weird, right? Yesterday was such a crazy day. Kind of the whole offseason, I haven't been getting my hopes up at all. I've been telling everybody that asked me, he's a Dodger. 100% he's a Dodger. And then yesterday happens, and I start to buy it just a little bit. I feel bad for the Blue Jays fans who really bought all the reports on Twitter. It's obviously heartbreaking. But I mean, I have to admit, I was like, okay, like the reports are out. Burrowsi's tweeting. It's probably like 70% Jays. And it's just, of course, just in classic Toronto fashion, heartbreak shocks us today. He's a Dodger, like I thought initially, but it's just so much worse how it happens yesterday. If yesterday doesn't happen, I'm not really that like upset. I expected it, but now it's like, wow, this really hurts. This is gonna take a while to get over, to be honest.
Well, let's go down the timeline here, because initially we planned to record about now and do what basically was the emergency pod on all of yesterday's shenanigans. So of course, early in the morning, we get that JP Morosi tweet that, the decision is imminent, which it turns out it was imminent. Then of course it percolates from there. You get the stuff from Hornstra that he's made a decision and it's the Blue Jays apparently, which now we know it isn't. And then of course there's the whole plane tracking saga. And then beyond that, there's the talk that maybe it's Ohtani on the plane. Someone exits the plane and it turns out to be Dragon Den's finest. And then everyone's losing their minds. And then, of course, today there's JP Hornstra again doubling down. He goes, I know that it's going to be the Blue Jays. And then his radio silence. And then around 3:00, we get a post from Shohei Ohtani on Instagram. And he breaks the news that he's a Dodger. And he apologized in the process. He goes, sorry, I took so long to do it. But now where do the Jays go from here? Because this is because now you've missed out on Soto. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like, for me, I've always had the one plan. We wrote the articles, and that's kind of what I was sticking to. Maybe just grab like Hoskins, Pham, and then maybe trade for a third baseman to replace Chapman. That's kind of always my thought process. But I mean, they were so in on Ohtani, they were willing to give him all this money. So you got to think they're looking to make a bigger splash than what I wrote about, what my kind of thought process plan was. So I think the obvious answer is they're probably going to turn to Bellinger. I would guess. I mean, I don't know what a contract for Bellinger looks like exactly, but if it's not unbelievably ridiculous, like high money, I think it could be worth it. He's a risky player, but it could pan out. Like, he has the prospect pedigree, he has everything. It's just there's a lot of risk because he had so many down years, and then he finally breaks out this year, comes back to what he was. But there's some stuff in his profile, the hard hit rate. It's kind of, you don't know if it's a barrage, if he's going to be able to repeat it again and return to this player that he was. It's just a lot there. It's not. It's obviously just a huge downgrade from Ohtani. But
Well, we talked about Bellinger the other day, and you weren't able to join us, that there's so many red flags with him. And It didn't even feel like there was going to be this overlap in the market, because it seemed like, Cody Bellinger was maybe like a Cub, or maybe he could go elsewhere, but it didn't really feel like he was someone that the Blue Jays were going to target. It was kind of a bit up in the air and a bit inconclusive, what shall we call it? Now, you've missed out on Soto, you've missed out on Ohtani. You're trying to make a splash, clearly. I mean, we heard all this talk about maybe that the Blue Jays ownership was looking to maybe divest and become like the Blue Jays hotspot, even more so than it is now. And now they've completely lost the plot, and they're out in the wilderness now.
yeah, it just would have been unbelievable for just baseball in Canada just to have Ohtani come to the Jays. It just would have changed so many things. It would have made the game so much bigger. It would have been an amazing signing. But just, I mean, looking at the contract, like what are your thoughts on the contract? I mean, 700 mil, $70 million a year. It's crazy. I'm seeing a lot of initial reaction from Jays fans. Obviously, there's bitterness there. Everybody's like, oh, he's like, that's a crazy contract. I'm like, they're bitter, right? They're like, I'm glad he didn't come. But what are your thoughts? Like, do you think he's worth 70 million? Like, it's hard to say he's not. Like, it's
Yeah,
Shohei
I
Ohtani,
mean,
right?
like, how are you? It's Shohei Ohtani. You're gonna
Yeah,
make that $700 million back in short order.
yeah,
I'm actually more surprised that it's only a 10-year deal. I really thought he was going to be up to the 12, 13, 14, 15 years. And the other crazy thing, no opt-outs. This guy is a Dodger for 10 years, and that's that. Obviously, there's all the deferral stuff. There's going to be some record deferral stuff going on. And Ohtani, there's these reports that are trickling out. Again, this is like a developing story still, that he's tried to give the Dodgers some opportunity to wiggle around and maybe make some other additions. But I mean, it's the Dodgers. Like, this is Betts, Freeman, Ohtani. What 1, 2, 3 can match that in all of baseball? Like,
yeah.
he's worth it because it's Shohei Ohtani, and the Dodgers immediately go from favorites to win the World Series in a light sense to heavy, heavy, heavy favorites.
Yeah, and he's not even pitching next year, and they're still going to be definitely in that conversation to win the World Series this year when he can come back and at full strength from Tommy John and pitch as well for the Dodgers. It's going to be terrifying. Like 2025, you look at the Dodgers and you're like, how are they going to lose in 2025? It's the same story if the Jays got him too, right? It's like you look at 2025 when he can come back and pitch. You look at their entire roster. It's like, if that guy's pitching and hitting on our team, how are you going to lose? Like the Angels, it was kind of just him and Mike Trout, and they didn't have a lot of help around him. But now he goes to a powerhouse team, and it's like you're really gonna see the power of how good this guy truly is. He was kind of just hidden away with the Angels, and now we're gonna really see how impactful what he is able to do on a baseball field is. It's gonna be fun to see in the playoffs. It's just obviously just very unfortunate it's not with the Blue Jays, but
Yeah, I mean, from a fan's
time
perspective, it's
will
tough.
heal.
Yeah,
It will heal
I
over
mean,
time.
in the immediate aftermath, this is, again, like I said it off the top, this is pretty much catastrophic because you've completely lost the plot for the offseason, and you don't have a direction now. Now you've got this question of, are you going to extend Vlad? Are you going to extend Bo? There was a talk about, are they going to trade Bo Bichette? That didn't make a lot of sense, especially when you're trying to recruit a guy like Ohtani. But now that you've missed him, maybe you do think, this team has hit its ceiling. They've hovered around 90 wins for 3 years in a row now, and you're losing value on Vladdy and you're losing value on Bo. Maybe it's time to blow it up.
I think it's still going to take one more year before that it's not a ridiculous thought at all. But I think it's going to take one more year. I think we've mentioned this before in the pod. If it happens again, what happened last year, I think that's the direction you're probably going to have to go. I think there's enough names out there that they can still easily salvage this offseason and hopefully contend. It's just the like what I mentioned with the Dodgers in 2025. It's like, who's going to beat them in 2025? So this is the year right now. Like the Jays they kind of have to go all in. They might be forced into doing a Cody Bellinger deal that they don't want to do now. It's really unfortunate. They also waited a long time for the Ohtani they were waiting on Ohtani, and other deals are going on. So they missed out on a couple opportunities as well. I don't know how interested you were or the Jays were in these guys that signed while Ohtani was waiting to make his announcement. Candelario was one of the moves. He was obviously a potential fit at third base, and then Tyler O'Neill yesterday goes to the Red Sox. I know you like Tyler O'Neill as well. So those are two opportunities that they missed out on because they were banking on Ohtani. So yeah, it's tough for that reason as well, because they definitely missed out on some opportunities. What are your thoughts on them missing out on those two players?
I mean, I was a pretty well spoken, or I'd spoken a good bit about O'Neill and the fit that he had with the Blue Jays, given the Canadian background, given that he's a left fielder that played good defense and hit the ball hard. There was some concerns maybe about some of his underlying kind of numbers, but in terms of just smashing the ball, he smashed the ball. But again, now where are you going from here? Like, again, there's still opportunities. Maybe you look to a guy like Taylor Ward in Los Angeles. I've mentioned his name a few times as a guy that I think that the Blue Jays could target. And now, especially with the Angels out on Ohtani, obviously, they look primed to blow it up. But I mean, even still, like, I don't think that the Jays are really in a position to go out and buy, because it's Tiedemann, it's Martinez, and who else?
Yeah, the trade market's definitely very tough for them. I think like we've always mentioned the Twins as the obvious team that would be a really good fit to just make a trade with. But yeah, like it's tough because you don't want to give up Tiedemann, and that's kind of like the number one thing that every team's gonna ask for right away. And now you're just like, I don't know if that's a smart move to make. I don't know if we go all in just for this year, 2025's like we're not going to beat the Dodgers that year. So it's just, are we going to go all in, or are we going to say, tip your cap to the Dodgers? You guys are just too big of a powerhouse. We can't do it. I think the Twins are still a very interesting trade destination for sure. I mean, they have so many offensive guys that they could move around, and they definitely need pitching. So it's just a clear fit. I think they could easily move Kepler or Polanco, move guys around. Julian could go to second base to replace Polanco. They have guys like Kirilloff and Larnach who are really solid hitters and just don't have a spot in the lineup right now with guys like that. So it would be smart for them to move those guys. It's all going to depend on the asking price. And yeah, at this point, I don't think I'm willing to give up Tiedemann. I think if the Jays got Ohtani, I think obviously you're like, okay, like now we're all in. We can like move somebody like Tiedemann, but now it's scarier because that's the only guy that you're looking at in your farm system as he's like our future on the mound. So it's they're just in a really tough spot right now, and they have a lot of work to do in the offseason for sure.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
they
I
just
think it's
got,
salvageable, but
I
it's
don't know.
just
They just got knocked flat on their ass. Like,
yeah.
how are you going to come back from this? I wonder as well, like, where does this put Ross Atkins? Where does this put Mark Shapiro? You know, they talk about the renovations having, you know, potentially save Mark Shapiro. Ross Atkins just took a huge swing, realistically, to potentially save his job, and he missed. So he's going to have to come back and do something kind of incredible. And I mean, maybe you bring back Matt Chapman, but he's probably going to be too expensive to be worth your time. And if you do bring him back, it's an overpay. And then the same goes for Bellinger, where there's stuff to like, but I don't think that he's a guy that you can realistically build a really high quality team around. So the Jays right now are kind of in dire straits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at the two contracts there from the guys that you're talking about, Fangraph says Chapman 4 years, 80 mil. I think that's very reasonable.
No,
But
Chapman's
it's
going to get way more than that.
yeah, I think if that's the contract, like for sure, right? I think sign me up. It's worth the risk, but he's gonna like the market's just more than that. They have Bellinger getting 6 years, 144. I've heard way more than that as well. If I'm seeing those contracts, I'm like, okay, like this is completely fine. That's reasonable, but it's just the
Well,
way the market is. They're gonna get overpaid.
Fangraphs had Ohtani getting like 500
Yeah,
million. He
they
cleared
have
that
they have him
by
10 years
almost
for 50.
50%. He cleared that by literally 40%.
Yeah.
Like, you could, I mean, listen, it's not a transitive thing where every single player now is going to get an additional 40%, but Ohtani has reset the market.
Yeah.
So if you weren't going to get the guy that reset the market, you're going to get the guys that, as a trickle down, are going to have their markets reset by Shohei Ohtani. You're overpaying for every single hitter on the market right now.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, we're reacting to this in live time, so more details are going to come out. I'm definitely interested to see what the Jays offer was, if that's going to be leaked out. I mean, $700 million. I would just like to see how close if they offered that number and then he just chose the Dodgers, which obviously it's reasonable. It's an interesting decision because income taxes, like it's high with the Dodgers, so we can compete with them there, but it's obviously just the weather concerns. And if I'm Ohtani, like it's more favorable. It's a more favorable destination. It's hard for the Jays to compete with something like that. But then again, being the only team in a country, obviously that was something that Ohtani valued as well. So we had that to compete with. But I completely understand the decision. It's 10 years of your life in the warm or 10 years of your life in the cold. So I totally get it. But wow, it would have just been unbelievable. Imagine this the energy in this podcast right now if it
would have been
if it was him
totally
coming to the
different.
Jays.
Would
It would
have
just
been just
it would just been like a feeling like we've never experienced for baseball in Canada. Like it would have reminded me for sure of the playoff run, just like talking to people that just don't ever watch baseball at all, coming up to me, asking me questions. It was just a great time. It was baseball was buzzing in Canada. It was that was the playoff runs in 2015, 2016. And I think it would have just been way more than that. Even though it's not a playoff run, it's just them getting one single player. It would have been an incredible atmosphere in Canada.
Yeah, no, it would have totally changed the dynamic, and now all of a sudden you're left high and dry, and you're left praying for hopefully something to come of this. But I mean, we'll see how the Blue Jays pick up the pieces from here. It's going to be really tough to see them do anything of never mind of substantial, significance on the Ohtani front. But even beyond that, I mean, we heard all this talk about they had two different payrolls. There was the Ohtani payroll and there was the no Ohtani payroll. Well, you can forget the $270 million payroll that the Blue Jays were hopefully potentially working with under those circumstances. I mean, right now the Jays are lined up for already close to 200 million, probably more than $200 million in commitments for next year. And they're probably going to be maybe 210, 220 ish if they're lucky. Like there's not a ton to add. We're just getting some more from producer Zach here, but it's tough to say like exactly how to feel. Like it's just, I don't know, man. It's tough to recuperate from this. I guess we'll kind of see what does ultimately happen, but any parting words?
I mean, Jays fans are strong. They're Toronto sports fans. We've been through it. We're gonna get through this like we always do. But yeah, it's tough, man. I don't know. It's tough to really put into words how disappointing this is. Even though I've been saying it all off season, I'm like, I'm not gonna get my hopes up. We've been through this on Twitter with the Jays. They're gonna break our hearts. And yeah, they broke our hearts, man. There's nothing really else to say.
Yeah, Blue Jays fans, certainly not the outcome they were looking for. That's going to do it for us here on the Bird's Eye View podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter or Spotify, wherever else you get your podcast. You can follow each of us on Twitter. I am at J Negin-Shecter. Jake, you're Jake Brannen _ Zach, your Worden _ Zach. And of course, the podcast is BEV _ pod. Check us out on YouTube as well. We're also live on YouTube and Substack, where you can catch all of our written content. Thanks so much for listening, and we will catch you next week.